You're listening to the Real Estate Runway podcast, powered by Quattro Capital, where we are all about alternative business and investment strategies to help you amplify life and maximize wealth. Here's your host, the recovering engineer turned multifamily investor, Chad Sutton.
All right, Real Estate Runway family, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Runway podcast. I'm your host, Chad Sutton, and I'm joined today with a guest who is much smarter than I am, Mr. Mike Taravella. Mike is a CPA turned full-time real estate investor. You might remember I am an engineer turned full-time real estate investor, so we're both nerds in our own right. He's the asset manager with Rand Partners, about $150 million of assets under management, around 1,500 units. The guy knows his stuff. And he has acquired or been part of the acquisition team for over $31 million in multifamily assets. I cannot wait to learn from this guy. Mike, how you doing, brother?
Chad, just living the dream on a Friday with you, and I get to talk real estate, numbers, and nerding out with you. So I wouldn't want to spend it any other way.
I love it, man. You know, we said we were going to bring beers to this, and we didn't. So we're just going to pretend. So let's crack your fake beer.
Cheers.
There we go. Cheers, brother. All right. Well, Mike, I know you like the back of my hand. We've known each other for a while. Tell the listeners who Mike Taravella is and how did you become, the asset manager you are today? I mean, you burned the boat, quit your job. How'd you get here?
Yeah, so I did the traditional path of just nerding out in accounting because I was good at numbers and didn't want to be a teacher my whole life because they didn't get paid well. Shout out to my mom for aspiring me to be better than that. So I did accounting because I just knew that I've always wanted to do business. And my mom said, hey, you're good at math, so do accounting. And it set me up because it's the language of business. So I spent 2 years professionally doing accounting at Ernst Young, which was great. It was like as an auditor, it was super important to understand the financials and how all these massive companies acquired literally an Excel spreadsheet filled with numbers for the income statement and all their other financials. But I took that experience, which was amazing, working with startups with Dan Gilbert and Quicken Loans. And I launched an esports organization, media production company, and was anywhere from an accountant to CFO for about 12 of their startups. So just taking that path of understanding financials and helping teach business owners was super helpful. And that's why I just nerded out on systems, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs and even real estate investors at times think everything is a unique process, but really we can dumb it down and systematize it so that it's the same thing every time and, tweak the machine. And then I just realized that working with Dan and his team that I was teaching companies to scale, but I wasn't listening to my own real estate investing. So took a year off just to educate myself. I had some single family. Took a year off, educated, was doing the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift of just underwriting, networking, and doing a podcast. And then joined the Jake and Gino team in 2019. Been a part of it 2 years ever since and been managing over 1,500 units across Tennessee and Kentucky. And have acquired, like you said, 31 million. So it's been an exciting ride, especially with 2020 in the mix. It really was a great way to understand a lot of different things and figuring it out head first. So I got to meet you and a lot of other people within the Jake and Gino community as well. So it's been an exciting ride, to say the least.
I hear you, man. And meeting me might have been the I'm going to say, what's the opposite of pinnacle of your career? I might have drugged you down a little bit, honestly.
That's not. Oh, stop it, Chad. Chilling at Retrograde is always on a Friday is always a great way to spend a day in Nashville. So I appreciate, it's been amazing seeing your growth and your team's growth and having Mo on our podcasts, and you guys are kicking ass and taking names.
Likewise, man. It's fun watching the Rand Partners team and your personal team grow as well. So I appreciate that sentiment. Let's talk about asset management a little bit. So, you and I, we talk about this over cups of coffee all the time, that, there's a lot of people out there who are exposed to the big, sexy world of acquisitions. And that's great. But it's almost like a dog chasing a car, right? Eventually, sometimes the dog catches the car, but he doesn't know what to do with it when he catches it, right?
Yeah.
The world of asset management is not sexy. It is operational, right? But it is literally, it's almost like you buy a car yourself and then you expect it to drive itself. I know that's coming, but we don't quite have self-driving assets yet, Let's talk about, the core of asset management? What does it mean? What do you have to do with an asset after you buy it?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And so I think the one thing I hear a lot on podcasts and everything else is the asset manager manages the manager. And it's really just I disprove it because you're collaborating with your property managers to do what's best for the asset, the investment, and to your investors, because it's the layers of accountability. You're keeping the property managers accountable with the performance because you need to hit the numbers, because your investors are going to keep you accountable in what you're paying. So investors want to get paid the same every quarter or even more than what you're underwrote. So you need to really make sure that your underwriting and your numbers are getting hit. And that's coming up with creative ways, because in Lexington, our property had a 7% water hike bill just because the government said so. There's no way we can underwrite it, but stuff happens and, hurdles come up. So you have to come up with creative solutions. So there's just a lot of different ways of, weekly check-ins when we have a pulse document reviewing our numbers to make sure the property is going well, monthly financial reviews to make sure we're hitting our targets. And then we do a yearly budget every year to make sure that we have goals and guidelines going to the next year. So those are kind of the big three when it comes to accountability to our property managers, because all in all, we want to make sure we're stewards of our investors' capital and that we're paying them out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I want to take this two different directions, Mike, because,
Yeah.
You and I have both been fortunate to be in companies that have grown rapidly. And the type of asset manager you need to be when you have 50 units is very different than the asset manager you need to be when you have 1,500 units, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for the early owner, right, when you're first getting into this and you have a small portfolio, and when I say small, I mean, it's relatively speaking, let's say less than 150 units, we use the 10% of the 1,500. That's not even, yeah, that is 10%. Sorry.
Yep.
Math is hard. What are some best practices? Like I'm a new asset manager. What are some things that you tend to look for, when you're collaboratively working with your managers, or like, how are you keeping these assets on plan?
Yeah. So I would say get on the horn with your property managers on a weekly basis. And the biggest thing that I see, and I compare our property managers to investors on Shark Tank, or CEOs on Shark Tank, and entrepreneurs, because they are the front line of your business. They control the ins, the outs, money going in, money coming out for expenses. So they need to understand everything that goes in. And if they don't know their numbers or what's really going on at the property level, it's concerning. So we review this document called the Pulse, because it cheesy is enough. It gives you a pulse of what's going on at the property, and it breaks down our occupancy. So if our occupancy, and this is in East Tennessee, if our occupancy is below 95, 96%, we review our marketing. And so then we're looking at our guest cards, which is our inquiries on the property from apartments.com, Facebook, etc., and the applications as well. So we want to see for every 3 guest cards, 1 applicant if we're not below 96% occupied. So because of this kind of if-then statement, if our occupancy is below and our guest cards aren't there, then our ads aren't hitting. So let's review our apartments.com. Let's revamp our Facebook spend. Let's see what we can do to add it. And then our applications are, okay, maybe we had enough guest cards and inquiries on the property, but when we showed it, it may not have resulted in well. So what are we over promising? Are we under delivering? What's going on? And so we revamp our customer service. And then from there, I think once you get people in your building, you got your marketing down. The biggest thing is collections. As you know, if you get people in and they're not paying rent, you're not going to make money. So then we just really narrow in on our delinquency numbers to make sure week over week people are paying, and making sure that within our 92% economically occupied. So because if you get people in, you get people paying rent. The only other thing then is making sure you're not overspending on budgets. And so that's why I think the budget is probably the sexiest tool in asset management, which I'm sure all your listeners want to hear, especially going into Q4 when that's when all the budgets are made.
I'm gonna have to really call into question a few things if you're saying budgets are sexy, but we'll go with that. So I love everything you just said there, Mike. And really, what you just, I've given talks on underwriting before, and what you just said are kind of two of the most important things. One is, the income, right, and making sure you realize that income. So that is checking your collections. Expenses kind of are what they are, with the exception of things popping up, like you just said. So, obviously, you set a budget with the PM, and you get variance reports, and you make sure that you're on track with that. But the CapEx budget is where you can really make or break a deal really quickly. And, you'd be surprised. It's almost like quicksand. You start spending too much money too early, and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are, just poking on that one a little bit, what are some ways that you have found are useful to keep either your construction team or property management team on CapEx budget?
Yeah, I mean, we had to let team members go because they would just blow out the budget on flooring. And so it's just important to make sure. I think the biggest thing when we take over a property, we create a turn document that has links to Lowe's, or we have Chadwell, and wherever you get your supplies. But we say, here is the SKU number, Lowe's, vinyl flooring, whatever, piece you want to do to the units. And you create a templated turn so that you don't have to guess what it should be and what the pricing is, because the more you systematize it, the easier it is. The pretty much you can plug and play any team member, like A plus, because I don't want to take away from property management, because you need A players for property management, but you can plug in any A team member and just making sure they know everything that's going on, so they don't have to, you eliminate the guesswork so that they can go out and know their residents and solve those issues without having to go backwards and go, well, how do I turn this unit? Where do I even begin? So it's really just drawing on that and making sure on the takeover process, or if they're a new team member, making sure they understand from A to Z what a great turn looks like for your business plan.
That's a perfect answer, Mike. I really appreciate that. And now I'd like to shift a little bit. And we talked about, so this is kind of, this is your basic asset management stuff, right? And I'm going to lob you a softball here and watch you crush it over the fence, because I know you love this word systems and systematize. Let's help let's help the listeners understand today, how do you have to be different when you're looking at a 1,500 unit portfolio versus a 150 unit portfolio? So now we're talking about scaling, and how do you maintain control and asset management at that level?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just you might have to have different systems. So I use Asana every day, because the more I have to think on my head of what I need to do on a day-to-day basis, the less effective I am. So every property has in Asana just an L10. Here's our punch list of what needs to get done this week. And it's really just making sure that, for us, we have a monthly property management meeting in which I'm presenting on the financials. And it's not just income and expenses. We look at net promoter score. So those are those amazing surveys you get everywhere that are on a scale of 0 to 10. How likely are you to refer a friend or colleague for whatever, Jamba Juice, or staying at our property, whatever. So because we're vertically integrated, we're really hammering on that customer service, because what we found is the higher our net promoter score is, the lower our delinquency is, and the less turnover we have at our properties. And so when you think about that, you're like, oh, that sounds great. But the biggest thing is that you're saving a ton of money, anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000 on a turn, and you're getting a rent bump. So that means your team is spending less time working on renovations. You're spending less money on vendors. You're paying investors more, and you have happy residents. So I think that's a big piece that not many people take into consideration. And I think Joey Coleman has a phenomenal book of how to never lose a customer again. And I'd highly consider that for your listeners, because if it's an investor or a resident, it's a very powerful way that within the first 90 days of the customer journey, you can create a raving fan and go above and beyond, which our property managers do a phenomenal job, from knowing their residents' dogs' names to their kids, you name it. They are super outgoing and really care for the residents.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, by the way, everyone, that will be in the show notes when we're done here. So, don't worry about trying to scribble that down while you're driving down the road listening to this episode. That's an interesting way to think about it. And you're right. I mean, keeping people in place is sometimes counterintuitive, but turn expense is real, whether you're renovating or not. It is a real expense. Filling a unit is a real expense. And a lot of these teams that you hire on your property are paid hourly. So the more you're exercising, then the more your payroll is going up and the less your NOI is. So I love that answer. And I will echo something you said. You're an Asana guy. I am a ClickUp guy. They're very similar tools. But
never heard of ClickUp.
ClickUp is very similar.
I'm gonna look that up after that.
Yeah.
That's how I'm gonna spend my Friday night looking up ClickUp.
There you go. Typical CPA Friday night. But it's a very similar tool, project management based, and it's very collaborative. So, it really helps our team stay in sync. But we also have the equivalent of a project folder for every project, and every phase of the project has a sub list, and we have templates. So it's like every time we start a project, we load that template, and all these things have to get done at some point in the project, all the way from acquisition to disposition. And so it really helps us keep the team informed. It helps us make sure no one's dropping a ball on anything. And, one thing you mentioned as well, the L10 meetings, what was the source of that? Was it the book Traction? Is that right?
Yeah, it's Traction, Rockefeller Habits, but mainly Traction. I love Traction because it's the one book that I've seen because everyone says start a business, but this is the one book that really creates accountability that a lot of entrepreneurs don't have. And I've seen it with Dan Gilbert's Family of Companies. Everyone has that book and actually got training on it for some of them. But it goes from your 10-year vision, 3, 5, 3, 1, and quarterly visions and what to do to get there, and has that a weekly accountability. So anyone looking to start a business, I think that book, Never Split the Difference, and Principles by Ray Dalio are the top 3 books I would highly recommend, and are great ways to launch a business, and you'll be very successful with it if you follow them.
Mike is exercising my fingers. Those will also be in the show notes when we're done. That's fantastic, Mike. And I wish we could talk about asset management all day. There is a lot to unpack there, but give us a little dirt here real quick. So tell me something in your asset management career that did not go well. Like, just give us a nugget of something maybe at least these listeners will not repeat. Have you heard about the Multifamily Investor Nation Summit coming up on January 20th? If you've never been, it's a 3-day information-packed event for multifamily investors with over 1,000 attendees and over 50 speakers. Not only will you hear from experts about finding deals, raising capital, underwriting strategies, selecting markets, and so much more, but this year, our partners here at Quattro Capital are excited to be participating with 3 speakers at the event. Our amazing Kim Wendland will be speaking on the often neglected subject of asset management, how to make the machine hum. While our most interesting man in real estate, Maurice Philogene, will be speaking on how to leave your corporate job for a freedom lifestyle. I personally will even be speaking on the topic of how to perform due diligence on multifamily assets before you purchase them, and the not so common things to watch out for. Go to mfinsummit.com to grab your ticket and use promo code Quattro to get $100 off of your full access pass. Whether you are new to multifamily investing or a seasoned investor, you do not want to miss this event. Join Team Quattro at the Multifamily Investor Nation Summit. Visit mfinsummit.com, promo code Quattro. That's mfinsummit.com, promo code Quattro.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, I think when you take over a property, one of our properties, it took a lot longer to turn and get ready. So I think for us, it was being very aggressive with the budget, and this just takes time and seeing it. And it's hard to have that onboarding. So one of our properties locally in Knoxville, we've had it for a couple of years. We recently just turned 48 units in 4 months. because it was a half vacant property. So we were assuming a gangbusters return, but a lot of things that kind of went against us was residents were renewing, so our renewal plan wasn't as aggressive as we needed to, and so a lot of residents took the rent that we had not going to market. And there's just been, I think, as you grow your business, people is a huge component of it. So we've had a lot of turnover in the sense of just getting A players in. And so as you grow and scale, is just making sure you keep that level of A players in that can execute that business plan, because people might say, oh, well, if I lose this person, then it's not getting, this job won't get done. But I think it's having the growth mindset of there's a lot of A players out there that we can find, attract, retain, and execute and learn to grow and develop internally. So for us, it was our turnover plan wasn't as aggressive, was a little too aggressive than we thought. On top of turnover at the property didn't go as well. The property is still performing well, but I think it just, when you're underwriting properties, it's very easy to, hey, we're going to get to market in a year and this is what's going to happen, and we're going to refinance and we're all going to get paid and high five and pop champagne when we hit that refi and return all of our investors' capital. But I think it's stress testing. What does it look like in a great case, a good case, an okay case, and a bad case, and making sure you can live between those lines. Because in property management, anything can happen, from dumpster fires to people maintenance walking out. It can be very challenging. So I think it's just making sure you can live with any case scenario that is presented, and you work on your team and how to mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Yeah, that's some incredible wisdom right there. And, I think listening to you speak, I have the context where that's coming from, because I know how you're structured. The RAND team is structured to where the asset manager is very involved in the acquisition phase, right? And so you're very involved in the underwriting, whereas, we are structured a little bit differently, where, I lead the front end team, and we have another person who leads the asset management team, and we have a transitions role that kind of passes the ball between. So the hardest time on a property is handover, right? It's that first 90 days, making sure everything's firing on all cylinders. But to go with that, it's really important that whoever is penciling the business plan also has a mind for managing the asset. And that for us, that means collaboration between the acquisitions team and the asset management team, very regularly. But income realization is the hardest thing to project. And it is the thing that can hose you immediately. If you're too aggressive with it, you'll never recover, so that's a great piece of wisdom there, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just takes time and a lot of experience. So
yeah,
I'm not saying never do a deal, but it just make sure you go through each of those scenarios of why wouldn't the deal work. And that's what I tell our analysts of why won't this deal work and why would this deal work, and just running through all the worst case scenario, like the one reason why the deal won't work. And I think that's a very good way to stress test deals, because everyone talks about the best case, but what is the reason this deal won't work?
I think our friend Evan Holiday over at Holiday Ventures says this the best. It is, every deal dies every day, right? It's like death by 1,000 cuts, and it's the one that survives that gets bought. So we're always looking for a way to kill the deal, some reason it won't work. And if it survives that look, that's when you buy it,
Yeah, that's really great, because I think there's a lot of times where, trying to figure that out. And I mean, there's so many deals out there, and you go through and you're like, well, how does this work? And it might not work for you, but it might work for someone else, and that's okay. Just take time, persistence, and just never give up, because it took 2 years for me to finally start getting traction with this stuff. And in multifamily, it's nowhere near as simple. And I think you say it best of who, not how, of just scaling up and getting your team in place. And it takes time to get that dream team in place. So never give up, and who, not how.
Yeah. And what he's referring to is the book Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. You all have heard me mention many, many times. I love that book. That will also be in the show notes. This is going to be a reading list more than a podcast, guys. I apologize for that in advance. So, all right, Mike, we are coming up to our Quattro Trio, 3 questions that Quattro likes to ask everyone who comes on board here. What is your superpower in this business, friend?
I think mine is, after 5 years of being in accounting, is seeing a T12 and just seeing what's going on. When I see the T12, the numbers tell me a story. So I think, and I don't want to nerd out and say Excel shortcuts, because I know there's like people doing VBA on their underwriting, but for me, it's just seeing the T12 as like a story of what's going on with the property and finding ways to, save on expenses, but also come up with ways when we can increase the profitability.
I'm not even going to say what the acronym VBA means. For those of you who know what it is, congratulations. You're as big of a nerd as Mike and I. So give me some dirt, man. We've talked about how awesome you are and what you and your team have done, that is amazing. But give me some dirt. Tell me, what's your biggest failure to date and what did it teach you?
Biggest failure.
Life or business?
Definitely not believing in myself. I took 5 years to feel confident to leave public accounting to do real estate full time. I was staying in Michigan. I was moving to Chicago. People were like, yeah, you'll be back in 6 months. I told my mom, my family, I was leaving the quote unquote safe job, but I should have believed in myself much sooner, because you see now these like 22-year-olds doing multifamily and have hundreds, and it's just like, wow. But but also too, comparing, I think 2020 was a weird year of just trying to, navigate a lot of different aspects, and just don't ever compare yourself to anyone else, because everyone has their own journey and figuring out stuff. And so you can get into a dark place doing that, but having that mindset of, hey, today's a new opportunity to grow and learn and talk to investors and learn from the best. So I think never compare yourself to anyone else, and just figure out how you can get better every day and never give up.
So true. That is a mic drop moment right there, Mike. See what I did there? So are you involved in any philanthropic cause you'd like us to promote? After all, philanthropy is one of our 4 pillars. Yeah.
So we're really big at Second Harvest. So in all of our websites, jakeandgino.com, on the top left corner has how many meals we've donated. So it's a local food bank that we have here in East Tennessee. And we spent a half a day volunteering this past quarter, and just helping the food bank, especially with the pandemic and kids not being in school and getting those free lunches. We felt it was an immediate impact. We do it every year. And later this year, I'm going to run a marathon. So I'm going to work with them on trying to promote and see how we can work together and try to promote Second Harvest even more. So super excited to work with them even more, and feed the kids of East Tennessee and families, because food is important. Food is vital, especially with
food is vital.
Everything going on.
Food is vital. Mike, I love that. I love any philanthropy that benefits children, because they are, quite frankly, having to deal with the hand they were dealt, So I love that.
Absolutely.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. This has been fantastic. It has been our first asset management podcast. I hope to have more of these. I keep saying users, I was programming
That's
something earlier today.
engineering you, man. If the user goes through this path, it solves it.
I was programming something earlier today, and literally the user was the term. So anyway, if the listener would like to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, the listener can reach out to me via email, mike.t@randcre.com, social media @valueaddmike, Mike Taravella, TARAVELLA on LinkedIn, and I think everywhere else. So happy to help serve the community and help take over the world with you, Chad.
And that will be in the show notes as well. All right, Real Estate Runway family, this has been another episode of the Real Estate Runway podcast. Over and out.
We hope this episode was insightful and brought value to your day. If so, please be awesome and leave us a 5-star review. Find out how Team Quattro can help you at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this is the Real Estate Runway podcast.